Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Grants 101 for Georgia's local officials. This is a 12-part webinar series brought to you by GMA as well as the Georgia Association of Regional Commissions. I'm Claire Chan with GMA, and before we begin today's webinar, just a reminder that you are participating in listen-only mode. So we do encourage you to use the chat, as many have already, as well as the Q&A functions in Zoom. If you would like to submit a question for either Amanda or Kimberly, just click on the Q&A button. If you would like to add a comment, please use the chat function. Materials from today's webinar and the past 4 webinars will be linked in the chat throughout the hour. You will also receive a follow-up email with materials and other information if you are pre-registered. So without further ado, let's turn things over to Amanda Day and Kimberly Hayes-DeMuga of Payday Services. Take it away, Amanda and Kimberly.
Thank you, Claire. Thanks. And let's see, I did a little shout out, Three Rivers Regional Commission, Athens, Milledgeville. I know some good friends of mine live down in Dublin, so I'm usually heading down 441 through Milledgeville, but not speeding because that would be wrong. I know. Stonecrest, welcome. Right down the road from me. I'm east of Decatur. So yeah, just right down I-20. So let's jump in and get started today. Welcome back. Today, as Claire said, as a part of this series, we're going to be talking about programs that win grants. And the reason why we're calling it that is not because we're guaranteeing that by simply sitting here and watching us talk for an hour, you will be able to win grants. No, that would be great. But that's not what it is. And we're not claiming that at all. What we're saying is we'd like to give you an understanding and share our experiences all around looking strategically at programs and priorities in your cities that would be best suited and most competitive around winning grants. Amanda, is there anything you'd like to add to that explanation?
I think that's a good thing. Yeah, just as we'll go through and talk, it didn't matter, no matter what the grant is and how eligible you are, if you don't have a quality program that fits it, you might as well not bother. So that's why we want to start there before we even talk about writing, which is next in 2 weeks when we are all together.
2 weeks to talk about right. And we also are not saying go out and chase that money. If there's a program that looks good, you just design a grant that looks good. Just design a program from scratch and go after it. That is the opposite of what we're saying. So we're going to spend the next hour doing that. And also, let's see, we've got Mayor, is it Mayor Jensen of Toombs?
Jensen with a D.
Sorry, I was doing that on the fly. And also welcome Mary D'Angelo from Brunswick. So here we are. Here's what we look like when we're standing up. And we've been doing this for a long time. I'm Kimberly, and Amanda's also with today, sharing her many years of expertise at the local government level. Together, when we combine our experience, we've been teaching and training and raising money and helping other people do so for more than 50 years combined, all across the United States and a little internationally too. And we're just really delighted to have this opportunity to keep coming back and bringing you this information to help you make your cities better places to live for all your citizens there. Got a few house rules. They're the same as they have been for the last several times. Chat is great for connecting or commenting on something, but if you do have a specific question around program design or grants or any other topics we may cover today, the Q&A is going to be the best way to make sure that we get those in. And so both of those options are available down at the bottom of your screen if you use your mouse or your whatever you're using, if you're using a tablet, whatever it is you're using, those things will be available at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And as Claire mentioned, this is being recorded, and GMA will ensure that you have access to the slides and recording. And also we have resource guides and those things also available to you if you pre-registered, which you had to do to be here today. So here we are. To jump right into that, I want to just go over what grants do and what grants do not do, because sometimes I think that it starts there, especially if maybe you have a council member or just a concerned citizen that's like, oh, there's all this money, grants can do all these things, why aren't you doing all these things, beleaguered city staff? Well, yes, grants can do a lot of things and can be truly transformative, and they're huge government grant programs, as we have discussed now, through the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Recovery Act. So these grants and many, many more can do things like helping you grow existing programs, right? So in the slide, it says augment. So augment, expand, can help purchase project supplies, staff, equipment, as is listed at the bottom. Just overall expanding the capacity of certain programs. Particularly for BIL, as y'all all well know, there's money out there for all kinds of construction projects and programs that are tied to that Justice 40 concept. If you'll remember from like, I think the first program that we did, thank you, Amanda, where we were talking about if you're going after BIL funding or Inflation Recovery Act funding, 40% of the benefit of those grant funds must be benefiting disadvantaged populations. So incredible things you can do, incredible things that many cities in Georgia already have done with these funding, with this kind of funding. But in sort of the real world, day-to-day city operations, grants do not tend to do the things that are on the column on your right. You may need more clerks, you may need receptionists, and you may need all of these things. Grants do not typically fund that sort of front office or back office staff. So if anyone is coming to you going, well, you need a new staff, you need like a receptionist or an office manager, we'll just write a grant for it. It doesn't usually work that way. There may be some grants out there that will do that, but they are, I would say, super, super
Few
rare.
and far between.
Like unicorn rare. Grants typically, and particularly for cities and municipalities, they're typically not going to cover your budgeted costs that are already in your budget, or just sort of the general operations of your city municipality. That's just not what they are. And grants are not going to pay off debt. And most grants, because there's always going to be someone with an exception, and I want to honor that, but I also want to say, again, unicorn, most grants do not just typically renew automatically without reporting. So it's like, if you get it once, you shouldn't assume that you'll get it again. There are some exceptions, but again, they're very rare. So again, growing, transforming, adding to, expanding, purchasing new, remodeling if it fits the parameters of the program, building new buildings, potentially purchasing large equipment. Yes. Internal office capacity, debt, general operations, light bills, no. Some of that could be covered in your indirect costs on a grant, but they're rarely grants where they're like, we know you're struggling in your municipality because you don't have enough office staff, so here's $500,000. If they existed, we would put it in the comments with a link and we would end the call and y'all can just go right now and find it, but they don't. I mean,
well, and I would tell you, Kimberly, something I wish I knew so much earlier in my career, because it would have saved me a lot of time and heartache. If you've never read before, and I'm going to tell you right now, it's boring as all get out, but it's helpful and useful and relevant information. But when it comes to federal grants, the guidebook for grant management is the 2 CFR Part 200. It's also called Uniform Guidance, or UGG for short. And it's the code that basically says what you can and cannot do with federal funds. And then there's a section called cost principles that tells you what you can and cannot do with federal funds. And there is a section in there called general government services. Because I don't know how many times I have had a council member ask me, we need a new city hall. Can't you get a grant for that, Amanda? We already built this public safety training center. Can't you find a grant to reimburse us for that? And the answer to all of these things are no. And at the time I would tell them, no, it's not there, because I knew from my search that it wasn't there, but they kept going, I've got to believe it's got to be allowable. There's got to be something out there. So I wish I had known better to go, hey, here's the Bible when it comes to federal money. Right here is where it says they do not pay for those sorts of things. That would have made my life a lot easier, because then they would have had something other than me just saying that doesn't exist, because it's like they didn't believe me. And half the time they would tell me, oh, I know someone at the city of so-and-so did this. And my response was always, great. Who is it? Let me talk to them. Or can you get a copy of their application? That never happened. But, it's just, I wish I had known back then. And sometimes too, just going like, hey, I sat on this webinar with these two ladies. They've got 50 years of experience. They said it multiple times, because someone's sometimes just saying, well, a consultant told me. That's what it takes for them to take it in. And believe me, I've been there. So
We'll be the bad guys. We'll be the
yes,
bad guys. Straight up.
but I wish I had known that so much earlier in my career. I would have saved a lot of heartache, because it's the kinds of things they want you to fund oftentimes are not fundable. And sometimes you need proof of that. So
Do you think, Amanda, and I'm sorry, but I'm just gonna ask,
for it.
do you think you could put a link to the uniform guidance in the chat while I do the next slide?
Absolutely, I'll do that.
Already have it memorized. I get that. But a link to share with people who might not understand. I mean, it's you're not making it up. It's legitimately, here's what federal funding and most state funding, because as we've discussed in classes past, a lot of state funding is federal pass through, and so adheres to that same policy.
Yeah.
So if you don't mind, if you want to roll it to the next slide, I'm just like barking orders. Roll to the next slide. I'm not late. I'm feeling saucy today. So when we're talking about grantable programs, I mentioned one of those already, right? Those community-based infrastructure projects. Primarily, you're seeing that a lot around, and as you know, GMA on their website keeps track of available grants for you, and you can go and check that out. And there's also a link to that in your handouts as well. But there's a lot of community-based infrastructure projects, right? If you are just joining us for the first time, there is money out there, and a lot of it for those kinds of projects right now under the bipartisan infrastructure law. Everything from energy projects to water and sanitation to projects centered around environmental cleanup, and also, again, including that Justice 40 concept, where at least 40% of that program for which you're seeking funding must be benefiting disadvantaged populations. And there's all kinds of information on that in that first webinar that we did for you, and also on the GMA website. Regional needs, again, as I said, healthcare, regional hospital, access to healthcare, sanitation, transportation. These are all things that are going to be grantable with the right match, right? If it is a new program or an expansion of a program. As Amanda said, if you were fortunate enough to construct a brand new community health center, you can't find a grant that's going to pay your municipality back for those costs. If you are planning and haven't yet broken ground, that's the time to look for that kind of information. Amanda has lots of experience around recreational programs and parks funding. Again, community-based, community-oriented, just any kind of capacity growing for public services. And of course, that extends to all kinds of public services, such as first responders. These are the kinds of things that are in a very general way, these are the kinds of things that are going to be a better match for federal funding and state funding that's based on federal funding. I'm sure there are exceptions, but I'm really comfortable saying that these are the kinds of programs and services that are good matches. And you won't see on this list, we just need help. We just need more help in our office because we can't keep up with the demand. It needs to be tied to something, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. Now, and also, we are just focusing on federal grants. There are also federal contracts, slightly different animal, kind of same. It's like a zebra versus a unicorn, right? Same kind of, except unicorns are imaginary. That's not a good analogy, but maybe zebra versus regular horse kind of thing. They're out there. That's not where we are going with any of this education, but sometimes there are contracts that for specific programs that the federal government says, we want folks to sort of basically bid on this in their area. So again, pilot programs, drug courts have been a great example of this kind of funding use. So those programs are out there, and it's possible to build in additional staff or additional equipment, right, for these new programs. And maybe depending on the agency and the particular grant, there could be projects that would allow for existing building renovation to house a new program. But by and large, it needs to be something that is coming up in the future or near future versus something that's already done. So
Yeah.
that's just a brief overview, and y'all are so welcome. And thank you, Amanda, for putting that in the comments. Everyone is very excited. They're excited as you were to read it. It's scintillating reading, but it's really important.
Well, and it's, especially talking about that last bullet point there, I will say, because it can be real hard for everyone to grasp, especially those, the people you're reporting to. Like, the drug courts is a great example, because you are probably, a lot of you probably have a municipal court that handles, like, it may handle DUIs, it may handle like, don't have insurance, those smaller types of crimes. A lot of it has to do with traffic infractions. You're probably never going to find a grant that's going to pay for your judge and your bailiff and your court clerk for your municipal court system, right? They just expect that to be part of your standard operating practices for running a city or county, right? But the federal government has recognized, like, hey, there's been an influx in people in violence against women or in drug. And so they will create these special grant programs specifically to start a court that handles the backlog of cases for the number of either violence against women or there's the VOCA, which the victims of, I forget what that one stands for, but there's a lot of court related grants, but they're for very specific things. And you're never going to find one, again, just for your, hey, we got a lot of people who are, have speeding tickets or have code enforcement violations here in our city. But if you have a special court that meets those needs of whatever that grant program is, then that may be a match there. But again, like Kimberly's been saying, it's not something you're going to go, oh, I found this grant. It's due in 30 days. Let's try to throw together real quick why we need a drug court. Hopefully you've thought about it because you've seen an increase in the number of cases. You've got data, you've got all those kinds of things, which we'll talk about as we're moving forward. So
I think this next one is all you.
It is me. So okay, so how do you get started when it comes to all this? Are you just looking at the grants every day and just picking things that sounds good? No, that's kind of like our dartboard here. You're going to miss more often than you're going to hit. Or Kimberly likened it to throwing spaghetti in a wall to see what sticks. Really not a good way to operate when you're planning out what grants you're going to go after. Because if all you're doing is just responding to what shows up in front of you, you're not going to be as competitive. You're not going to be as compelling in the programs you're putting forward, which means you're less likely to get funded. And what we want to do is put together programs and applications that are going to, get you funded is what we're shooting for there. So what we should do instead is figure out, first of all, if we have any program or projects that are suitable for grant funding. Okay. What I like to do first, anytime I've worked somewhere, especially in cities, we're typically pretty good at planning stuff. Like, I know every city on this call, you at least have a 10-year comprehensive plan. We have to turn that into the Georgia Department of Community Affairs every year, right? And they approve. And so within that document, hopefully you actually have some projects where you have planned out for the next 10 years, things that need to be happening. Okay. Whether it's infrastructure related, whether it's parks and rec, whether it's public safety, economic development, whatever it is, right? Also, cities oftentimes plan for other things, right? When I worked for the city of Alpharetta, we had a 5-year park and rec master plan. We had a 5-year transportation plan. I don't think we had a formal public safety plan, but our public safety usually knew the latest and greatest of things that they were going to need to be able to do their job well. And so what I like to do every year was figure out, okay, what is on our list? What have we already thought through? What do we know we want? And that becomes our priority list. And I'm not saying we never deviate from that list, but we have already talked about, we know we need this. We know it's a priority in our community. Hopefully we've had some community engagement too, which gives it extra oomph when we're talking to our funders about it. And I'm taking those lists and then I'm doing my grant research to find the grants that match the things I already know are my part of my priority. And another thing too, is you're putting together that priority list too, is it's good to understand the common components to every grant application, which that is the subject of our next webinar we're doing in 2 weeks. We're going to cover those common components. Because it's helpful as much as you can get this information ahead of time, the more prepared you're going to be when that grant gets released. Because what we don't want to do is chase the money, or we don't know what's coming down the pike. Because by federal law, federal agencies only have to give you 30 days notice when a grant gets released, which means if they released a grant today, what is it, October 12th, they could make that grant due November 12th. They've given you all the time they have to give you. And if for those of you who are on the call, I'm guessing the majority of you, grant writing is not your sole job. You're probably doing that on top of being a city clerk or a department head or a city manager or a mayor, right? So you don't have 40 hours a week for the next 4 weeks to put together this huge federal grant proposal. And so when you're chasing the money like that, when it's like, oh, it just came up, let's go for it. Let's figure out, you're probably a little bit already behind the 8 ball. So if you can start figuring out early, these are our priorities. What grants do we know are coming up, by doing the research, which we talked about already, and going, hey, there's this grant. It comes out every 2 years. And the next time it's going to come out should be around this date. Let's start planning for that ahead, right? Instead of just chasing that money. Because what happens when it chases, like, let's just say a grant appears for trails. You're allowed to build trails with that. If your community has never talked about a trail system, okay, so you've got 30 days to figure out, do we even need a trail system? If we do, where would it go? What kind of material would we want it to be? How wide is it going to be? What is it connecting? What is it connecting to? Do we even have interest in this? How much is it going to cost? How much is it going to cost to maintain? Because the grant's not going to maintain it. We're going to have to do that. And so suddenly when you're writing that grant application, you have more questions and you probably have answers to put in there versus a community who has studied the heck out of it, right? Like the association, the Atlanta Beltline, they have studied the heck out of where they want their next trail to be and what the economic impact is going to be and all that kind of stuff. They're going to be competitive. And that's the kind of people you're going to be going up against when it comes to grants like those. And so if you're just chasing the money, you're behind the 8 ball. And so this is what we're trying to avoid. We're wanting you to plan ahead as much as possible, so you're not just chasing that next grant.
Fair enough.
Yep.
And so for the rest of the hour, or the 35 minutes, as usual, we'll be whipping through those final slides. I just wanted to introduce the top 5 common elements that for to be competitive in looking for grants. Obviously, in no way is this a guarantee. Because you never know who else is coming to the table in that competitive grant area. But if you are able to really do stellar work in each of these 5 areas, you're going to be in a position to be a lot more fundable, like a lot more likely. So first off, you've got to prove what the need is, and we're going to talk about the need may not be what you think it is. And evidence-based, either you have your tracking or you have a solid track record of successful program management in your municipality, or if it's a new program, it's based on something that's maybe worked in a similar place somewhere else that you're going to adapt to meet your specific needs of your citizens. The number 3, making sure that the goals and objectives that are usually part and parcel of just about every grant application are things that you can legitimately measure, and that they'll also make a difference, that you'll be able to measure the change that should come about as a result of this program. And again, so we're not talking here about basic equipment grants, which are important and I'm sure have really been really welcome items for a lot of folks on this call. We're talking about program grants or infrastructure grants and things like that. You also want to be able to demonstrate that you have the administrative capacity and the program expertise, or you are contracting with experts to bring to not only to administer the program, but also to administer the financial aspects of bringing in federal and state money. And as Amanda put in the chat, we're going to go into a lot of detail on this in a future episode. We're just introducing some topics here, particularly around goals and objectives. And finally, having those trackable outcomes, whether it's crime data or water quality or whatever kind of program that you're looking for, being able to look at how you can track that over time, super important. So those 5 things together, if you're able to make significant progress on that, outside of the grant itself, that's just good business, but particularly in the grant itself, it's going to make for a more competitive grant. And we say that as not only grant writers, but as grant reviewers. So our fancy slide of the day here with all the animation and everything, I alluded to this earlier. When you're thinking about community programs, particularly, again, I bring back BIL and IRA kinds of funding. It's not necessarily what your agency or your municipality or your department within your municipality needs. That's not the needs statement per se, right? It's what the community needs. So if you do have a lot of people speeding on the big highway past your city, and you were like, how can we, is there a grant to help us track this more accurately? If there are community risk factors for accidents or other kinds of things that you have been tracking over time, that's the need, right? To make the community safer. How will you do that? With more officers or more equipment or more vehicles. So I'm hoping that comes across. And that's also a great teaching point for folks who may be well-meaning, but are just like, oh, well, we're just tell them we're just a small municipality out here and we know the help we can get. But really, that may be true. But in the grants world, because we are so severely understaffed or our infrastructure is crumbling, we are not able to provide the quality of life, the quality of safety, the quality of drinking water, the quality of safe access to parks and trails and recreational activities. Our community is suffering as a result of this. And so part of the solution is getting your municipality the help it needs to carry out these programs, but the ultimate beneficiary when you're in that sort of grants world and orientation, particularly when you're presenting a needs statement, is what does the community need? So sometimes for folks just getting started out, that could be a stumbling block. The exceptions are equipment grants. Obviously, that's a pretty straightforward. We like this, or our equipment is X years old. That's a little bit different. I'm talking about programs and complex infrastructure here. And this seems to be a slide that I did not circle for myself. So why don't I just jump into
you,
Amanda? Amanda's like, hello. So we're talking about proof of community needs or assets in the community. Some ways to approach this. You want to start with reliable sources of sound information. And most of the time for most municipalities, y'all have that. You have to track all these different kinds of things, right? There's all sorts of tax records, all sorts of property records, all sorts of records around first responder. I mean, all kinds of things. There is usually a reliable source of that because it's you, right? But also looking sort of for data, and this is where things like the U.S. Census Bureau, and I know we have, and in our in further slides, we have some other examples of some reliable sources that Amanda's going to be talking about. Looking beyond the basic demographics, and also with the next point, taking what your situation is and then comparing it with either similar municipalities or neighboring cities or counties, or against the state average for whatever it is you're looking at, whether it's access to healthcare, access to mental health services, average response time, quality and access of drinking water and other kinds of systems, business development. So as Amanda said, next time we're going to go through all the details, but we just wanted to hit the high points of things you need to think about bringing into your needs assessment. On a larger step back moment, this is why we say if the grant is due in 30 days and you have not even gathered the first iota of information about the competitive parks and trails grant that Amanda used it as an example, you can see how the complexity of going through and proving your need will take a lot of time. It's not just sitting down and putting words on the screen. There's all the background things that need to get started. And one of the main places is making sure in your, sometimes it's called a need statement, problem statement, community assets. Those are the kinds of things that you really want to prove. And yep. Well, all right. All right, Camry Johnson, we want to see you. We'll hold you to it. We'll see you there. So if we also at the bottom, the community involvement and collaboration. I know I'm just on a broken record with BIL today and Justice 40. However, a big part of that, again, for those big infrastructure, energy grants, water, transportation, healthcare access, is community involvement and planning in the planning process. So if this speaks to Amanda's point of making sure that with your priorities, you're going ahead and gathering that information. How do you know those are priorities? Because you have evidence of that. So gathering that, plus making sure that there's opportunities for community involvement in the planning, that is a requirement for so many large-scale federal grants coming out right now. And also it's just a good thing to do, but it takes time. So getting back to the, let's just don't, wholesale chase that money and just because the grant was announced, looking and establishing your true community priorities, having town halls or whatever works for you in your municipality, hybrid meetings, surveys, whatever works is a great way to start. But again, that's like that's part one of the 5 things that will really make it a competitive, more competitive grant.
Well, and that's, I would say, one of the edges I would say that cities definitely have over, say, nonprofits or other type agencies that may be going for funding is, exactly who your community is, right? You've got your city limits, every house, every apartment complex, every business that's located within your facility, you've got their address. Your organization has public meetings regularly, your city council's meeting or your county commission is meeting. You probably have planning and zoning meetings. We like to meet when it comes to local governments, right? And I'm guessing every city has those handful of citizens that no matter what, they show up. So if you need some stakeholder engagement, you already know off the top of your head, who are the people we should be reaching out to. If you're trying to expand Parks and Recs types of programming, you've got lists of people who already participate in your programming. And I'm sure they are not shy about telling you, yeah, this baseball field is great, but what we really need is a turf football field. And here's why we need that. Or what we really need, there's lights, because once it gets dark, we can't play out here anymore. So take advantage of that access to those citizens and get that input, because when you're putting together a grant application, it's one thing to say, hey, we need lights because we don't have anything. It's another thing to say, we surveyed, this many people and 50% responded saying that's the top priority and this is what they're missing out on. And so take advantage of having access to the people that you're serving. It just makes your application so much more impactful, because it's not just like, hey, we're sitting here at a desk in City Hall and we think this is what our people need. Instead, you're saying, we know this is what our people need because they keep telling us over and over and over again. And so we're trying to solve that problem. So.
Absolutely.
Okay. So let's talk about when you are putting together whatever your program is going to be. And again, the program can be as simple as, hey, we're having a soccer program for the first time ever. It could be, not saying that running a soccer program is simple, but it could be that all the way up to, hey, we're doing some workforce development things because we know we've got these industries and they don't have employees. We also know we have a high unemployment rate. So let's get together and let's start doing some workforce development type work. No matter what it is you're trying to fix, whatever program you're putting together, you want it to be a program that when whoever reads that grant application is like, yep, I understand their problem. And I really think that their solution is going to work. Okay. So when you're putting together your program, you want to look at maybe other successful programs, right? I know there are some cities out there who will think outside the box and may come up with something so new, but the majority of us, we're looking around going, who else has already figured out this, how to fix this? What did they do? How did it work? And so there is nothing wrong with looking at other communities that are similar to yours and ask, I'd call them up and say, hey, I've noticed 2 years ago, you got this program going. I've heard it's great. It's very successful. Tell me more about it. So you can model the work you're doing on that of other agencies. And it doesn't have to be within the state of Georgia either. Look at what people are doing all across the country. Heck, check out what they're doing in Europe. Who knows? You could also look at peer-reviewed journals. Okay, so usually when people have tried something, especially if they've tried something new and it's worked really well, there's going to be some sort of article somewhere about it, especially if it's in some sort of trade magazine or something like that. So you can certainly get on the old internet. Google Scholar is a great place to look up those peer-reviewed journals and see what other people are doing. You could, again, just using your own local data. Y'all are smart people, you know, and so you might be able to put together, it may be a new program that no one else has done before, but it's based on the needs of your community, the feedback that you've gotten. And if I'm ever doing something that's like that, I usually tend to highlight, okay, who's going to be running this program, who put it together, and we'll spend some time talking about the, you know, the education and the experience of the person who decided to put this together and why it's going to work for our community. And again, input, you know, people that are telling you what they need, they're probably also going to be some of your citizens that are telling you, hey, I used to live here and this is how we did that and it was great. Nothing wrong with letting them help and share some information for you as well. You could have community partners. There may be nonprofits in your community, a university, that they are working on some of the same things. What's that?
Faith communities.
Absolutely. So yeah, don't think like, oh, it's only the city. We got to focus. It's just us. Reach out to your partners and get to know some of these other agencies, and they may have some skills and resources and information and ideas to bring to the table that you hadn't thought of. So lots of ways to put together your program. And again, it doesn't always have to be something uber complicated. It can be as simple as, hey, we know we need this. The city next door to us just did this 2 years ago. We're doing the same thing because it worked for them. And we are, you know, have a similar demographic. It can be that simple. So
True that.
Okay. And we are going to talk a little bit more about goals and objectives in the session in 2 weeks, but just wanted you, as you're thinking about your program you're putting together, know that most funders, not all, every now and then there's one that may not ask for, especially like an equipment grant. They often don't ask if it's like straight up, tell us the equipment, get it, great. But most of your programs, especially when they're involving people, they're going to want to know what your goals and objectives are. Okay. And in the terms of grants, goals basically are those long-term, broad impact, kind of impossible to achieve, right? So in your community, your goal may be zero unemployment. Your goal may be everybody gets, you know, has a park within 2 minutes walk of their home. Your goal, like you could have all kinds of goals and they may not ever happen, but you're like, in an ideal world, this is what we want to achieve. And it's nothing wrong with setting these lofty, beautiful, in a perfect world, this is how it would be, because we've got to have something to chase, right? So you're going to have those goals, but then you've also got to have objectives. Okay. And so these are going to be concrete achievements. Usually there's some step-by-step instructions in there that you are expected to achieve because you're telling your funder, hey, this is what we're going to do. And most people, when they talk about objectives, they want them to be SMART, meaning when you write your objective, it's specific. So you're not just going to say, if you've got maybe this big traffic infrastructure program going on, you're not just going to say, we're going to improve traffic. Great. What does that mean? And how do you measure that? You kind of can't. So that's not very specific and it's not measurable. Two things you need to have, right? You also want your objectives to be achievable, meaning they're possible. So while goals can be lofty that may, you know, you may get there, you may not, objectives, these are the ones you want to get to, okay? They need to be relevant, meaning they align with the work that you're doing, and they need to be time bound, meaning it needs to take place within that grant period. So you don't want to say, like, let's just say your traffic program you're doing, you know, you may say like, hey, in 30 years, we're going to get here. Well, that's great, but that funder's only going to be with you for the first couple of years, and then the grant's over and they'll never hear from you again, maybe, right? So that's great, but that's not, they want to know within this grant period, let's implement this program, and then what are the improvements that we're going to see? So it may be as simple as of the 80,000 people who use the Highway 9 corridor between this intersection and this intersection by December of 2026, we are going to decrease traffic times between these 2 points by 10 minutes. And that's pretty easy to measure, right? Your traffic folks can get out there. They can measure how long does it take to get from here to here today. But then once we do our project, which maybe we're adding some additional lanes, maybe you're adding signal traffic timing, maybe you're adding roundabouts, whatever it is you're doing on this corridor, you put in all the stuff and then you measure that traffic time, and has it been decreased by 10 minutes? And if so, great, you've met your objective, right? So, and that's pretty specific. You know, we were talking about the 80,000 people. Where is this happening? Well, it's on this road from this point to this point. It used to be, you know, X amount of minutes. Now it's this amount of minutes, right? And it's happening by this date. So it's kind of hitting all of those marks there. So when you're thinking about your programs, when you're building them, you want to keep in mind that you're going to have objectives that go with them. So you want, as you're building things, like what are things we can measure? What are the improvements we're going to do? Because if you don't think about that as you're building your program, sometimes it can be very hard to come back after the fact and figure out, okay, well, what are we measuring here? I don't know. What are we measuring? You know, so you want to keep in mind what most funders ask for, which are typically goals and objectives.
Mm-hmm.
So, and again, too, when you're building your program, you've got to think about somebody's got to actually do it, right? Even if you're like, oh, no, we're going to use a grant to hire a consultant, and they're like, it's, say, the traffic program, like we're doing this and we're adding lanes and roundabouts. We're hiring a construction firm that's going to come and do all of this. Okay, great. But someone in your office still has to make sure you have to go through your bid process. You've got to hire that construction firm. Someone's got to oversee that, make sure that they're doing things right. Somebody's got to be reporting back to the funder. And so somebody in your office, or maybe multiple somebodies, need to be able to help run those programs. So you want to figure out from the outset who's running it, and also are they qualified to do so? In other words, you just don't want to be like, hey, admin assistant, I know you've only been here 2 weeks, but you're going to run our $5 million infrastructure traffic project. And I know you've never done construction before and don't know a backhoe from an excavator, but you're in charge. Have I been on a construction site and not known the difference between? Yes, that's why I bring engineering people with me when I have to go to construction sites for those kinds of projects, because I'm like, I don't even know what kind of machine that is. What's going on? So you want to make sure you have the right people in the right place. And so that's part of building that program, is figuring out now, because what you don't want to do is wait till the grant happens, the award comes in, because then you're scrambling and then you're behind your timeline, and that is not going to be good. So as you're building your program, you really want to be thinking about who's going to be implementing this when it happens. Okay. So not only are you having someone implement the actual program, making sure the activities are happening, right? So let's just say you are doing a new soccer program, and in your application, you talked about, we're going to hire 5 coaches that are going to be, you know, probably parents. This is a volunteer gig, but we've got to hire 5 volunteer coaches, and we've got to schedule, you know, all the practices, and we've got to have this many games, and somebody's got to set up the tournament, and somebody's got to get kids registered. So somebody's got to do all of that aspect of the work, right? So they're managing the program when you get the grant. But then again, somebody else is managing all the other stuff, right? So if you're signing up kids, is there a registration fee for different things? Who's handling all the money? Who's hiring the coaches? Who's doing all of that stuff? Who's handling procurement? If part of your grant is to, you know, expand your soccer field or add lights, you've got to go through procurement for that. So who's doing all of that stuff? Who's making sure all your reporting has happened back to your funder? So this is grant management we're talking about, which I think there's a future date where we'll go into more details about grant management. But just know that somebody or multiple people are going to have to be in charge of making sure reporting is happening, and you're keeping up with proof of all your expenses. And if you're paying for someone's time, there's got to be timesheets. There's a lot of work involved when it comes to grant management. And so you want to make sure you're figuring out who's doing it, who's got the time and the ability, are they qualified to do this? Because one thing I want, like, it's hard enough to get grants. I don't ever want to lose a grant. So I want to make sure we have the right team in place to ensure that when we get an award, that we're going to see it all the way through to the end and we're not going to lose that money. Okay. So again, if you can figure out these things early on, it makes your life a lot easier, because I'm telling you what's going to happen if you don't figure all this stuff out. If you write a grant and it gets funded, everybody's going to look to you and say, hey, Kimberly, you wrote this grant. Congratulations. Now you're in charge of all of it. And suddenly you're having to do all the things. And you're going to be going, wait a minute, I already have a full-time job and I'm writing grants. Now I'm managing them too and managing the programs. I don't know anything about soccer. So you want to figure this out early.
And sometimes, as Amanda, as we roll into the next slide, a quick note about grant management and line items or budget items and grants, depending on the grant, right? And it will be detailed in the RFP, the request for proposal, the notice of funding opportunity, NOFO, FOA, whatever acronym they use to talk about the instruction guide. Sometimes you can go to a different section of the budget and build into your budget grant management, as opposed to grant writing, because the grant writing has already occurred, right? But the grant management will occur after you get the grant. Again, that varies not only from agency to agency, but from grant to grant within an agency. But just keep that in mind. Another thing that varies among proposals, even from the same agency or the same umbrella program, are the kinds of outcomes that they're looking for. And so again, we're down to the fifth one, right, of the different areas that will help you get a competitive proposal together. Looking at how will you know what success looks like? And there we can break it down into a lot of different ways, but thinking that through again for programs, this is particularly important. Amanda's example of the traffic, well, success is determined whether or not it's actually 10 minutes or less now between these 2 points as we define. Pretty straightforward, although certainly a complex construction project to undertake rather. But if you're looking at other kinds of more complex programs, particularly programs that might affect some kind of change and behavior or longer term changes, knowing and understanding how you will track those outcomes is key. So some of the things to think about: program delivery, checks and balances. It's for a lot of folks, and certainly for me when I first got started, it's like, oh, well, I want to evaluate whether or not the program was a success. Maybe it's after school programs and some sort of community food pantry at a local school because there are no grocery stores in an immediate area for a lot of your citizens, and it's a food desert. So what would that look like? But if you're not measuring how good, how well the program is actually going according to its program plans, if you don't have anything in place for that, how will you know? If it didn't succeed, how will you know what went wrong? Like if you were having, I'm going back to the after school program, or maybe it's a Parks and Rec program that's an after school program around sports or something like that. Community center, maybe a partnership with the Boys and Girls Club. If the program isn't a success because none of the kids' families had reliable transportation at that time to get there, so enrollment was really down. If you weren't tracking enrollment all along and you were expecting 100 kids and you only had 20, that's a part of an evaluation and a trackable outcome to sort of build into place. Then you also do want to look at short-term successes. So maybe there was a skills assessment or a fitness assessment, and that could take place at the start of that Parks and Rec after school program and at the end, if that was appropriate. That's a short-term success. Maybe a longer-term success is that the kids go on to compete in school sports, or maybe just there's a satisfaction level or some sort of other outcome. I'm hoping you're seeing now how tracking outcomes isn't necessarily just, we had 55 children enrolled in the after school program for 6 weeks. It's a lot more than that if you're looking for these big ticket grants that are around these more complex programs. So also, again, building into your evaluation plan those sort of at the beginning, are you planning, or is your planning including everybody? Then sort of in the middle of that grant program, is the program going how we had planned it? Are there significant barriers that popped up? Maybe it's a natural disaster, or maybe it's something else. Maybe there's whatever it was. Are we able to adjust for that? And then at the end, when we're looking at the behavior that we wanted to change, are there ways to make this program even more effective? Can we celebrate the successes and learn from it? Those are all the kinds of things that can go into program success for your grants. And obviously we're given this just the biggest overview. It can be a complex topic. Some grants will actually want you to, and we'll get into that into the next slide, we'll want you to have external evaluation. But so we on the previous slide, we talked about sort of the concepts around evaluation. But then when you're looking at who's going to do the things, it's important to understand who is going to measure this program. And Amanda's example of the traffic flow, you may have access to internal municipal employees, engineers, what have you, first responders, whoever it may be, who could measure that kind of thing. Or you may be hiring out for that kind of work. Looking at who's the best person to measure and why are they qualified to do so. This is all stuff that's going into the grant, right? This is stuff you need to think about now if you're writing the grant. Why? Not just because I'm making up all kinds of busy work for people, because I'm just not that kind of person, but it's because the grant is going to ask you for that. The funder wants to know that you can handle the financial part of it and the program part of it, and also that you got a handle on how you're going to measure whether or not it's a success. And why is that so important? Clearly, it has great importance for your citizens, but it also has incredible importance particularly when it comes to federal and state funding. Remember Amanda's example of, well, the city next to us did it and it was a big success, so we should probably try and do it. Well, how did you know about that? It's because they were evaluating that program, and through conferences or news articles or something else, they were able to disseminate that information. And they had that information because they had an evaluation plan. For some super large scale grants, will actually be in the instructions that you must hire a third party professor or group or consulting firm to do that evaluation. And if that's the case, they usually will build into what are the reasonable costs you can put into the budget for that to be funded. So whether it's something that you're doing within your municipality on your team of employees or a third party, it's something that needs to be thought out as you're creating that grant application. So again, I think you can see that it's not just sitting down and writing some things. There's a lot of thought that needs to go into this for sure. And you do need to write in a clear and compelling way. But there's so much more. There's so much consensus building and information gathering and communication that goes into a competitive grant proposal. And I'm just hoping to give you the information you need when someone might be pressing you for, well, it's due next week, but I mean, you can just write it. It's like, you could, but it may not be competitive if you don't have that strong, grounded, programmatic approach to that. And Amanda, is there anything in the chat? I closed my chat box. Is there anything that I need to address right now? Okay.
Nope. So, and I would just say this, we threw a lot of stuff at you, like building your program may be more complicated than you thought, but I bet when you really sit down with the right people and start talking about it, you probably already have a lot of the right people in place. You probably already have a lot of the answers. It's just a matter of talking about it and fleshing all of that stuff out. So I don't want anybody to sit here and think, oh my gosh, I just wanted to build a sidewalk. Why is it got to be so hard? I mean, it's building a sidewalk in the scheme of things, probably not the hardest thing you've done, but when you're competing against everybody else for the small pot of money that comes with a grant that will allow you to build sidewalks, you've got to put your best foot forward. And so that means not just saying, hey, we need a sidewalk because there isn't one here. It's more of, we have residents that are asking for it. We have, I've had shown pictures of where there's like a goat trail has been created because people are clearly walking this path, but it's not safe. And then and you start thinking about, oh yeah, safety. Hey, police department, do you have any data on any accidents or injuries involving pedestrians or bicyclists on this route, because there is not a bike lane and there is not a sidewalk, or those. So you start asking these questions, and you start realizing, hey, we actually do have a lot of data about this. So it may not be as difficult as you think, but it still is time consuming. It's not something that you can, if you're waiting till that grant comes out to figure out what your program is, I'm going to say that you're probably in 30 days not going to be able to build a program, get all the data you need, and have a quality and competitive application that's going to be up there with other agencies that are figuring this stuff out ahead of time. So that's why having those planning documents, again, if you don't even know where to start with your comprehensive plan for your city or your county, and use that as a starting off point, and look at what projects are in there that still need to be done. And you can start building information around those, and then start finding grants that are going to help fund those sorts of things. Right. So, as usual, we have a few resources for you. Claire kindly was sharing the archive with all of this information, where you will be able to go back later if you want to watch this again or share it with somebody else. We do have several podcast episodes, and again, these are all absolutely free, that you can go and listen to, where we talk more in depth about a lot of these topics here. So here's that list that goes with this particular topic. We do have a resource guide. That's part of what Claire shared with you. So Kimberly did a great job of finding some program development guide resource guides from a lot of different federal funding agencies. And I'm telling you, if the funders are telling you this is how you should do it, this is probably how you should do it, because we want to make our funders happy, right? Happy we got about 2 minutes left. Happy to hang around and answer any questions anybody has. And this is where y'all can find us if you have more questions later on. But we've got about 2 more minutes if y'all have questions.
And while you're thinking of any questions you may have, again, we just want to thank GMA for hosting us. And also, y'all, they provide really great information on that GMA website. Of course, we're biased. We think our trainings are fabulous, and you should go look at all of them at that link that Claire shared. But great resources there, and great information for you to develop those competitive programs.
If no one has questions, I'm curious what types of projects you were looking to try and fund this year and next.
Yeah. Drop it in the chat.
Yeah.
And we'll be back on the 26th with more, with just more information, all things that can help you get the information you need to get that funding.
So much, Kimberly and Amanda, for another great webinar, and just painting a very realistic picture about what the grant application process looks like, and sharing all your tips and tricks from your experience writing grants and writing them successfully. So if anyone has any last minute questions or comments, do pop them in the chat. But if not, we'll see everyone back here in 2 weeks on October 26th.
Sounds good. And someone mentioned a HUD grant. There's a special place in heaven for anybody who does HUD grants. So yeah, they're complicated, but it can be done.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye.
Everyone,
Bye.
have a great rest of your afternoon.